Hey, everybody. It's Jamie Beard, Geothermal Entrepreneurship Organization. Hope you're enjoying Pivot 2021 so far. Welcome to the Five on Fire award announcement. So here's the background on Five on Fire. It's brand new this year. We didn't do it at Pivot 2020. It occurred to my team that over the past year, there was so much catalytic action in geothermal that there must be a group of individuals out there that the world has kind of agreed helped make all that exciting stuff happen. So a couple months ago, we threw out a request for nominations for the Pivot 2021 Five on Fire Awards. And we received just an enormous amount of nominations, many dozens across, many countries, a very international crowd, very diverse. It was incredible. And several of the winners today were actually nominated by 2, 3, 4, even 5 different people for different reasons, which was amazing. And some of the nominations were so good that we wanted to showcase actually some of the quotes from the nominations themselves. So we decided to make a video that not only announced the winners, but showed some of the nominations comments and actually lets you hear some comments from the winners themselves. So these are the Five on Fire, the folks over the last year who broke new ground in geothermal, who inspired catalytic action, who challenged old paradigms, who mentored or inspired new minds to engage in geothermal, and that really pushed the limit on making geothermal go exponential. So anyway, without further ado, your Five on Fire.
One of the things that really excites me about geothermal is that every building is already sitting on this vast reservoir of renewable energy right there for the taking. I think geothermal has suffered from being invisible. Thank you to Pivot and all the work you're doing to make geothermal as a resource and our work within the community more visible, because I think once people learn about it, the elegance of the solution and what it could mean to have this baseload power source right there, already where it's needed, it wins us a lot of fans and a lot of supporters.
I'm Nick Cameron. I'm a geologist and geothermal enthusiast. After 20 years in the oil business, I was given the chance last year with BP to take a look at geothermal again. And we had a great team of people engaged in that. Delighted to say we were able to make an investment in geothermal at the end of the year, and really hopeful that we can move forwards. Excited by the potential that geothermal offers to deliver low carbon baseload heat and power. As a complement to the variable sources of low carbon energy such as wind and solar, geothermal really offers that baseload potential with small footprints that can really be beneficial in so many places in the world. So Jamie and the Pivot team, really delighted to receive the award. It's a fantastic spinning globe here, and thank you so much for the recognition.
I'm incredibly excited and honored to be receiving Pivot's Five on Fire Award. Thank you so much. This came as a huge surprise, but I hope it's a testament to how hard we've been working to develop our Saskatchewan hot sedimentary geothermal project. I hope that the recognition of this project, or of this award, helps to catch fire to our entire Canadian geothermal industry.
And I think geothermal is cool because it is firm, dispatchable electricity in an era when we badly need it without a lot of the problems that come with nuclear or CCS.
Hi everyone, look what I got! I was nominated for Geothermal Catalyst of the Year, and I can tell you all how happy I am with that nomination, so thank you all. What inspires me in geothermal is that we can make it happen to drive down those emissions and reach that net zero future, both for low carbon power and low carbon heat. We can. Geothermal is not fast fashion. We need patient capital and we need a lot of intelligence to make geothermal happen anywhere.
Really excited about geothermal and its potential.
We can do it everywhere, on every continent and in every country. I'm convinced of that.
I'm just so proud to be part of the geothermal community.
All right, congrats everybody. Congrats to the Five on Fire, and many thanks to the nominators who made these folks happen this year and really put on display how important their contributions are. So thank you. And if you've got folks in mind that you think should have been highlighted this year, don't forget Pivot 2022. So keep them in mind and make sure to nominate them for next year. So keep it coming. All right, so without further ado, we've got our next cool fireside chat. Today is going to be super fun. The fireside chat is led by Fervo Energy's own Tim Latimer, the CEO of Fervo. He's a very pioneering entrepreneur in the geothermal space and has made a huge impact. So welcome, Tim, and Tim will welcome in his panelist.
Great, thank you, Jamie, and thank you again. I don't think we can say it enough. For your spirit and organization and making this week a reality. It's been a ton of fun so far. We're almost at sort of the midpoint check-in. I've learned a lot from the sessions already and looking forward to the rest of the week. So as always, thank you, Jamie, for your leadership here and kicking off a great pivot. I am delighted for this conversation. We're joined by Jigar Shah, the director of the Loan Programs Office. Energy icon, entrepreneur, investor, personal hero of mine, somebody who's really championed the energy sector and has been involved in geothermal for a long time, has a really important role now in potentially catalyzing even more geothermal and making what we call the geothermal decade a reality. So very excited to have you. And I think, Jigar, maybe I'll welcome you up here. And if you could give us a short introduction of yourself for anyone who may not be aware, and then we'll just jump right into the discussion.
Thanks, Tim. Jigar Shah, director of the Loan Programs Office. I've been working in clean energy for, I guess, since 1995. So it's been a long time. And I've loved every moment of it, from the founding Sun Edison to the Carbon War Room with Sir Richard Branson to the Energy Gang podcast, which I'm very sorry that I'm not able to do every week anymore. And to Generate Capital, who, congrats to the team who raised $2 billion this week and continues to lead on the leading edge of sustainability.
Excellent. Thanks, Jigar. Maybe I'll start off with sort of a simple one. For anybody who may not know about the Loan Programs Office, or would you mind just kind of giving a descriptor of what it is, what the mission is, and just an overall overview of the purpose of the office.
Yeah, thanks. So in 2005, Senator Pete Domenici recognized that the Department of Energy has just loads and loads of technologies that it has done a fantastic job of supporting through technology readiness. And when they got to a certain pre-commercialization step, they just sort of sat there waiting for the private sector to invest. And what they realized is that the private sector wasn't against bringing these technologies to market, but the way that technologies in the energy space work is that you have equity and debt, right? Technologies are rarely 100% equity financed when they go to market. And for many commercial banks, they just didn't want to be first. And so there's just all sorts of technologies that are 10, 15, 20 years old that haven't been deployed at scale because banks didn't really want to be first. And so he created an office with his colleagues, of course, called the Loan Programs Office. And it was designed to be self-funding and basically to be able to provide money from the federal financing bank at the US Treasury Department to provide senior debt to technologies that the commercial banking sector just didn't really want to go first on. And so we have the ability to do the first 3, 4 or so deployments of a technology, even with micro changes, right? So in the biofuel space, some of the technologies that we're funding are, not completely brand new, but they're enough different that the commercial banking space continues to be worried. But when you think about nuclear or solar and wind back in 2009, 2010, or you think about today, small low impact hydro or pumped hydro storage or virtual power plants with demand response and load control, all of those things are scary to commercial banks. And so they've asked us to step in and do the first 3 or 4 deployments. We've got about $46 billion of authority and about 130 people that work full time in the office. And so we've been averaging, about 2 applications a week and about $7 billion of new applications a month, since May. So the Secretary of Energy has done a great job of bringing us out of the doldrums and back into prominence.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm glad back in 2005 that the center had that insight and we were able to pass it into law. I think it's something as I go on my own entrepreneurial journey, and we've established the company a little over 4 years ago now. It just becomes so obvious how important this kind of commercialization funding is. We built our company off technology at Stanford, and we're got the DOE support to innovate through things at the cyclotron road program at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And in my naive days, I thought it was all about technology and performance. And then you actually get out to the deployment side and you realize that it can be some obscure clause in an old insurance contract from forever ago that just keeps everything from breaking through. And there's just a huge role for somebody like the Loan Programs Office to step up. So it's something I've been a big fan of for a while, but you're at a bit of a disadvantage, Jigar, because you have, I don't know, how many hundreds of hours of content on the Energy Gang podcast that I can pull from. So I can put you on the spot a little bit. And one question that I put to you on the Energy Gang podcast, right after it became clear that the Biden administration was coming in, y'all did a nice show on what the first 100-day priorities and should be for the administration. And I put in my question, and it got asked to you about, let's get the tens of billions of dollars in the Loan Program Office off the sidelines and out catalyzing new deployment of technology. And this was just November of last year, so not that long ago. And your response, if you remember it, was no, that program wasn't going to be effective, that it had too much bureaucratic red tape, the process was too convoluted, and it just would take a congressional act and a multi-year effort to reform the office to get it to do what it was intended to do. I guess as they say, kind of be careful what you wish for, because after you said that, a few months later, you now find yourself in that role. So I'm really curious, what changed and what made you do an about face to be willing to step into this role and see more potential in what the LPO could do?
Yeah, but I guess that hot take didn't last very long. Look, I think that that the Loan Programs Office really hasn't served a brand new borrower since 2011. So to be clear, right, it really has been in the doldrums for a while. And as the Secretary of Energy said, it's been dormant. Look, I think the Secretary of Energy is a very unique person, right? And so there's no chance that I would have taken this job if it wasn't for, for her, right? I think that when you think about many of the previous Secretaries of Energy, they've been really focused on the R&D side. I think she's really focused on the deploy side, as she said a number of times, which is a really big deal. But I think the other piece of it is is, that sometimes when you say those kinds of things, they say, well, fine, well, you come in and fix it. And, as somebody who believes in public service, I was like, well, you're right. I can't just, be in the cheap seats on the Energy Gang podcast and throw pot shots at things. You got to come in and help solve it. I mean, luckily, I have to say that the people at the Loan Programs Office are extraordinary. And it turns out that almost all of the things that were holding back the Loan Programs Office were self-imposed. The Department of Energy and others had basically restricted itself in its ability to do things. And so we've been able to clear a lot of that away and really get back to the Congress's original intent, which actually has allowed us to get all these applications and loan in the Loan Programs Office. And it does take us, 5 or 6 months to get through the loan. So I think you'll see the first approval sometimes towards the end of the year.
That's great to hear. And I am curious too, just referencing back to that same comment, you said that it was going to take a congressional act to fix some of the issues. And then you got it, right? And I wonder if you maybe cover, there were some very relevant provisions in the Energy Act of 2020 on the LPO. And, what does that mean for your office's ability to support technologies?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think the thing that people focus on the most is on really being able to defer the fees. It used to be you had to pay 50 grand just to put an application in, and then you had to pay all the ongoing costs for diligence, et cetera, which really made it hard for small companies to apply for the Loan Programs Office. Today, all those fees have been deferred really to the funding of the loan, which I think has made it really a lot more accessible, and we've got a lot more applications as a result. The other things that we found, though, is that it used to be that we had a feeling that all of the credit subsidy had to be paid up front, right? So the way the Loan Programs Office works is everyone gets the same loan. It's basically U.S. Treasuries plus 3/8 of a point for up to 30 years, depending on the life of the equipment. But then we correct for that by making you pay a credit subsidy up front to really pre-fund the loan loss reserve for the whole program. Well, we now have the ability to spread those costs over the first 5 to 10 years, as opposed to making people raise a bunch of equity to pay for it up front. And so that was another big change, which was probably one of the most annoying things for borrowers. But other things that we were able to change is, for instance, merchant risk. So it used to be that you really just didn't believe you could take merchant risk. I mean, when you think about battery storage, when you think about modern solar and wind projects, when you think about other projects in the commodity space, not every place is going to sign a 20-year power purchase agreement with fixed price and offtake. And so we now have the ability to work with third parties to establish merchant curves and provide debt against those merchant curves, in a way that a commercial bank should provide that money, but is not interested in leaning in for. And so those are 3 big things. There's 10 more, but I'd say that the program is far more friendly today than it was last November.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I actually, when we get into the geothermal specific later on, I'd love to double click on that merchant issue, because that's not something I'd heard before, and that actually could be quite a bit different, because sometimes customers don't come along on the innovation journey as fast as elsewhere. So that could be an important piece. But just a comment, I think you're in a lucky spot. I think everyone always uses the phrase oh, it'll take an act of Congress to do this or that, and then I don't think people really mean that to mean literally I'm going to get an act of Congress to change this. So you're stepping in at a great time, and there's no when you're a startup and you raise venture capital dollars, something that gets drilled into you is that you're never going to have a more expensive dollar that you raise than you do in that moment. And the idea of a startup with scarce resources spending venture capital dollars on fees up front for an uncertain loan, it just is not realistic. So I think that's one of the biggest things, because and a lot of innovation is going to come from startups and small companies. And without that change, startups were essentially locked out of the market, because there's no way you can go convince your investors to spend their dollars on fees for a loan that you may or may not get. So I think that makes a huge difference. And I think kind of moving into the geothermal specifics here, again, pulling from some of your Energy Gang decades of hundreds of hours of content, I got very excited after you did accept the the new role in the administration. We had a very bittersweet Jigar's farewell episode, but what you said in there is you were asked about what your main priorities for the loan program are, and you stated the obvious ones is what you called them: offshore wind, hydrogen, electric vehicles, including more heavy-duty vehicles, and then geothermal as the fourth one, of technologies that were ready to go, where you think there was a mismatch between how investors were viewing the technology risk and where it actually was. So maybe before we get into the challenges, just give me the positives. So what do you see about geothermal that makes it kind of one of your top four items that you want to focus on at the LPO?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. One thing I'd say is that the loan program has already done geothermal before, right? So we did some geothermal loans in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. So from that perspective, it's not new to the loan programs office, which is helpful. We've done the underwriting before, so that's good. But I think the other thing I'd say is that when you look at, hydraulic fracturing and some of the other technologies that have really been practiced and ramped up since 2008, 2009, the cost of doing all those things and the understanding that we have around subsurface today is just quite a bit more specific than it was in 2008. And so I think when you think about where we are today, there's a lot of technology that can transfer from the oil and gas industry to the geothermal industry. And then the last thing I'd say is, I don't think in 2009, people were really thinking about things like flexible base load or, some of the other key components of the grid. And today it very much is front of mind, right? I mean, the intermittent resources like solar and wind, which are, extraordinary, and obviously where I've spent a lot of my career, are fantastic. And there are some solutions around, short-term and long-term battery storage, green hydrogen and other things. But ultimately what we found is that, if you want to control cost across the entire decarbonization effort through 2035, that having these sort of base load or flexible base load type resources are going to be super important. And geothermal is clearly at the top of that list, particularly in the West.
Yeah, that's all kind of a consistent theme that I think is a big reason why Jamie's organization is so successful and driving this. Is this time truly is different. I mean, that's why we call it the geothermal decade. It's tech and market coming together at the same time. No one thought about flexible baseload 10 years ago. I don't think that was even a phrase that people said. And thinking through it in a carbon-free way. And so it's a huge difference. And we're seeing those same trends. And I think the market is supporting it, from venture capital dollars coming into geothermal and power purchase agreements being signed. So it's there. And there's excitement in this space for the first time in a decade, as you mentioned. So I think we're really excited to get some of these projects far enough along for the loan program office to get there. But maybe I'll flip the question though, is clearly the loan program office has supported geothermal in the past. The loan program office was also really pivotal in supporting technologies like Tesla and some of the first utility scale solar projects. And while those technologies have taken off and have really graduated in some ways out of the stage where they need LPO support, we're still here 10 years later talking about how we need this support to really get kicked off. Why do you think that is? When you look at this from either your private sector investor experience or at the loan program office, what are the real barriers we as an industry have to cross off to actually get buy-in from the finance community to truly scale? What's keeping us back, holding us back right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'd say that, at the time at which the Department of Energy did those loans, there was a whole bunch of buzz, right? Remember how people were like, Iceland's been doing this a long time. We should actually just replicate it. It's going to be so easy. And we have all these engineers and we've already mapped all these things at the Department of Energy. And, this is going to be great. And then I think Google at the time was looking at enhanced geothermal and we're going to do that. And they bought the company. And so there was a lot of go-go stuff, right? And then you had US Geothermal that I think had raised $200-300 million of private capital and they were going strong. And so I think part of this is recognizing that there wasn't a sufficient amount of humility actually in the space. And even with all that bubble and everything else, you didn't have a lot of emergent winners outside of Ormat. And so one of the challenges was people saying, okay, you had all these different approaches, right? We had the same thing in wind and solar, frankly. And have we actually harmonized on a way to really manage risk so that we have a consistent product where if we go through this diligence, if we hire the right consultants, if we get the right independent engineers, like, are we going to get a consistent product every time? And the answer was no, right? And so I think this time around, I think people are saying, well, we think we can do better. And there's lots of reasons to believe them, right? I mean, one is that, hydraulic fracturing is like very mature. And so a lot of the best practices, horizontal drilling and all those things can be used today. But the other piece of it is that you now have companies that are fairly desperate's not the right word, but like more interested, like Halliburton or Schlumberger or others who've seen a great fall off in some of their revenues on the fracking side, who are like, hey, maybe we can repurpose a lot of these assets, a lot of this know-how into the geothermal space, right? It used to be when we did diligence in geothermal, people would say, the best we could do is plus or minus 25% for the amount of heat that we think we can get out of the well, right? It's like, that's a big range, plus or minus 25%. If you were to run that on a spreadsheet, right, minus 25% means that the project's probably not going to meet debt service, and plus 25% means that the equity is going to get 30% returns, right? And so, so I think that, we have the tools today to actually narrow that range with, additional research and work and that kind of thing, test wells, et cetera. And then I think we also have the ability to sort of learn around, how development really should be done, right? How do you tranche out the milestones to make sure you're not just spending a bunch of money and then wasting it all? But how do you actually drip it out so that you actually hit real milestones, which then gives you greater insight to, developing the next milestone. And I think that approach has also given people more comfort around putting development capital into geothermal again. So look, I think that it, as you suggested, geothermal has a chance right now. It's being given another chance to succeed, but I do think it has to learn lessons from the past and make sure that they really focus on solving them this time around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you look at the ebbs and flows of the geothermal market. And I think everything you said is exactly right, but I also want to credit the folks that drove forward that previous big interest in geothermal, because we take the lessons from that time period and are able to build on them from kind of a standing start now. I always refer back to it's a very business school thing, but the Gartner hype cycle, where they show that the hype builds and you get what they call the peak of inflated expectations, and then you drop down to the trough of disillusionment before you come up to the slope of enlightenment. And you can't really find technologies that didn't have to go through that peak of inflated expectations. But then you learn so many lessons from that you can carry them forward. So we're quite excited about it. And I'm curious about your lessons from solar, perhaps, because when we think about risk, I think a lot of times geothermal, when we all get together as an industry, it turns into a bit of a pity party, right? We talk about, oh, we got all this drilling risk, we have all this execution risk, we have all this permitting risk, we have all this stuff. And we like to think of ourselves as somewhat uniquely risky and have all these challenges. But what's interesting for me, and I'll give you an example. I had a great conversation with Doug Eaglesham a few months ago, who got a lot of loan program office support when he was with First Solar. And I was telling him about how impossible we were compared to solar. And he was like, oh no, you go back to 2009 and every question you're asking about how fast is the resource going to degrade? Is it going to perform the way it expects? What's the cost control going to be? Are all questions people had about utility scale solar then. And so in some ways, obviously we have unique risks, but in other ways, it's not like the other industries couldn't figure it out either. So if you could take your experience in solar and getting it from a fringe resource that banks wouldn't underwrite to where it is today, where everybody wants to, where it's almost too boring to finance. I mean, what were the key risk reduction things that happened in the solar space during your time in the sector? And what are the biggest lessons we could apply to geothermal from that?
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, let me try to answer it this way. I'd say that, so in 2014, when we started to generate capital, one of the first things I did was reach out to all of the geothermal wells, right? So this is like sort of, and companies like Alterac or Circ Energy or some of these other players. And I said, there were a lot of medium to failing projects, right? And I said, look, is there a way for us to come in and recapitalize all these projects, et cetera. And I'd say that the hype cycle comment that you made is what it is. And I don't know that I have a problem with it, right? Whether it's green hydrogen today or some of these other areas, right? My problem with geothermal is that I think, as opposed to wind and solar, it was very hard for me to meet the people underneath the hype cycle who were actually just toiling away every day, making things less risky and easier to do. What I was getting was a lot of BS from people saying, this stuff is just inherently risky, and like, we just can't figure out a way to fix it, right? And I think that, and in 2014, when I reinvestigated geothermal, that's all I saw were people continuing to say, it's just risky, Jigar. Like, there's nothing you can do. Like, like, it's just going to be hard. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we, get the engineering wrong. And I was like, I used to work at BP. Like, we did stuff that was way more complicated than this, and we didn't get the engineering wrong ever, right? That's just not how it worked. So like, I don't understand what's going on underneath, right? And I think what's happened to the geothermal industry today is that there are people who've joined the geothermal industry that have oil and gas backgrounds, who I think have taken the risks that geothermal presented more seriously, and didn't expect investors and others just to say, we'll give you a pass because you're green, and we'll give you a pass because we need flexible base load, or whatever it is. And I think that's what the solar and wind industry did right. I mean, we were always filled with skepticism, every one of us. I mean, we used to always, like, it's one thing to say that here's like my marketing document or whatever else. It's another thing to believe it, right? We knew what we thought the truth really was. And we actually were always under promising and over delivering on the engineering side of our truth. And every time we didn't know an answer, we really did spend the money to try to figure out what the truth was. Like, what impact does soiling have? What impact does, two-axis tracking, have? What impact, like, do things have on motors? Like, how often do motors last? Like, do they fail midstream? Like, what's the default position of the software? Like, there were just so many things that we were constantly skeptical about. And so, and we didn't allow those people to get caught up in the hype cycle, right? Those people just toiled away every single day and made sure that we were improving our product. And I think that the geothermal industry is now on that trajectory, but I don't think it was for the last decade.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, frankly, there's just such an enormous menu of tools that exist to characterize the subsurface and develop now that didn't exist even 10 years ago. I mean, it just, anyone who's been in the onshore oil and gas sector can talk about how different things were even 10 years ago. So I do think it's interesting. A couple quick ones, because we're unfortunately running short on time already, but I really want to circle back. This isn't anywhere close to my prepared questions, but you personally piqued my interest on your merchant comment. And and I wonder, maybe we have a broad audience, so maybe if you could understand what it means to be merchant versus elsewhere, and then talk about the sort of maybe the dynamism in the power sector. Because I think if you go, read the textbook on this, if you've got your checklist and getting your offtake secured is like, item number one and non-negotiable. And you really piqued my interest there. So maybe comment on what that means and what's changing in the landscape that y'all are opening up to merchant risk now.
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways of doing things, right? And I think what project developers are really taught is you have to figure out your revenue equation first before you figure out the site and technical side. And I think once you move to merchant, right, where the revenue side is no longer a 20-year contract with a power purchase agreement through a 1,000 megawatt RFP like California is putting out, or other things, but instead now you're saying we can do rolling 2-year contracts, we can do merchant curves, we can just go to a power marketer and get a 2-year hedge on the power prices and things like that. Then you're far more free to just pick sites that are ideal for geothermal, right? Sites where test wells have already been drilled, you actually have a much lower cost of development, you actually feel like, because of geological pieces, you can actually get the costs in lower. There's lots of things that you can optimize optimized for on the cost side, right? Where you say, look, if I'm not constrained by the grid side and I can actually just dump the power into the grid whenever we produce and that kind of thing, then it's valuable, right? And part of that is knowing that there are ways for you to get paid a lot of money, right? So like in Texas, where you've got, $9,000 a megawatt hour coming up pretty regularly these days, you could say, well, look, like 2.8 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever the average is doesn't really work for us. But as long as we get 70 hours a year of $9,000 a megawatt hour or $1,000 a megawatt hour, then we really can make the numbers work. And we just have to make sure that from a maintenance perspective that we're always online, and that's not the time that we're offline for maintenance, right? And so there are ways of which to do that. And then generally what you normally do is you don't just do a merchant project in one location, you do 10 merchant projects, and then you cross collateralize the risk across all 10. So one of them may be offline for maintenance, but the other 9 are not. And so as a portfolio, the risks are even lower that you're going to meet debt service and pay your bills on time than if you just do one project, right? And so those are the kinds of situations that we're now comfortable evaluating. It doesn't mean that we're going to, provide you guys any subsidies based on that approach, right? We still want a commercial bank approach and want to make sure that we hit the metric of reasonable prospect of repayment. But we understand that there are places where you're pretty confident that you're going to be able to get compensated well for being able to run almost 24 hours a day.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And like I say, it's interesting that to hear you say that, because I think it opens up a huge market potential for geothermal, where again we can focus more about siting projects in the optimum location, and it is something too that we see. A lot of ways people forecast prices is they just take a price and then apply some escalator to it and go. And there seems to be a big disconnect in the markets right now. Whenever you think about the value that geothermal provides, you can simplify this down to we provide capacity value, we provide energy value, and we provide environmental attributes value. And what we see a lot when people are making buying decisions is they just take today's capacity value and apply some escalator to it, and that's what it is. And there seems to be a big disconnect in Western U.S. electricity markets where we know the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant's coming offline. We know all these coal retirements are happening. We know we're getting more and more extreme weather events. And that doesn't seem to be met by the market right now, where people are really pricing in a big run up in capacity value as these events unfold. So it's something that's certainly interesting and opens up a lot more development opportunities. So it's exciting to hear you say that, and I think it could be really catalytic for the industry. Coming back maybe to the broader DOE a little bit, I can tell you I experience a lot of FOMO when I see these big initiatives launch. I'm very excited to see the long duration storage initiative announced by the secretary earlier this week. Very excited to see a big hydrogen initiative, although they kind of stole our name. I think Earthshot belongs a lot more with the geothermal sector than other things. But I'm a little bit curious, and this conference is a great example of it. The investment community, the customers, the technologists are all getting excited about geothermal. When do we get our day with the DOE? I mean, are you able to push? Are you seeing excitement there up and down the chain at the DOE? Are we getting the buy-in from the administration? When do we get the more appropriately named Earthshot for geothermal and get the might of the Department of Energy behind our initiatives?
Well, it all comes down to the fact that, look, we love all of our technologies equally. And I think that the big thing is around what you need from the Department of Energy, right? I mean, from my perspective, the geothermal industry is not a learning curve issue, right? With long duration storage and green hydrogen, it's really more about learning curve and, cumulative doublings of experience to reduce costs, right? Geothermal is really not that. And low impact hydro is not really that either. There is some efficiencies around engineering costs. You can imagine engineering costs becoming smaller for each project. And then also, mobilization costs could come down over time as well. But in general, I think geothermal is really more about consistency and value establishment from the markets, right? And because if you were to do a merchant curve, which I'm not saying that you shouldn't do, by definition, the cost of capital is higher, right? It just is, right? And so you can imagine a utility company saying, well, why would I want to saddle the ratepayers in this region with higher costs from geothermal when I could just sign a 20-year PPA for your stuff, right? And then you get much lower cost of capital, right? And so that's something that they can do, right? But I think that when you think through what geothermal really has in the way, I think it really is more about consistency, bringing in the big players, right? Bringing in Halliburton, Schlumberger, the big oil companies and others who have expertise in this area, and getting them to bring their, tens of thousands of engineers to bear. And then I think it's also around establishing with the RTOs, the markets, the utility companies, that they really are going to need this flexible baseload. And so as their coal plants shut down, they're not going to replace them with solar and wind alone. They really need to bring in low impact hydro, biomass, geothermal, advanced nuclear, and some other sources, right? And so, I'm happy to pitch an Earthshot for you within the Department of Energy, but I don't think that you're really a learning curve driven, and there's some learning curve pieces, don't get me wrong, and there's a lot of great technology, but I think it's really more about consistency for the markets.
Yeah, and I put that, I may disagree with you a little bit, which is that I do think we are a learning curve industry. The learning curves only happen when you solve the consistency problem. And so I think that's something that we're excited about with some of the technologies we're seeing today to deliver more consistent results, because that's what lets you work on learning. And the other thing I'll point out here is, consistency is something that you can only prove with data and shots on goal, and us convincing the investment community or the offtake community that we're consistent requires us to actually build projects. So if you know of any place to provide catalytic funding to a burgeoning industry so that we can prove out that consistency to get later stage capital, let me know, because our industry is quite ready for that.
The check is in the mail, as we say. But I do think that the LPO is a form of catalytic capital, and I think we are willing to lean in now for projects that may not be built until 2024.
That's fantastic. I think we're coming up towards the end now, and I just want to pivot to maybe a different topic, a little bit more personal career advice. There's a very wide audience on this show. A lot of folks are rethinking their career in oil and gas and trying to picture themselves in a clean energy future. You and I co-authored an op-ed together last year about how geothermal was a great place for oil and gas to lean into. If y'all want to check that out, Jigar and I wrote it and published it in Utility Dive. But one thing that was interesting, myself and you both started our career, with you with BP in the oil and part of the oil sector. And I'm curious if you could just describe a little bit about your career journey, what it was like to work more closely with the oil and gas industry, and what advice you may have to anybody who's trying to rethink their career in the context of the energy transition.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the oil industry is an industry that has had a lot of practice doing what it's doing. It's had a lot of practice around planning, around protecting the environment, around health and safety, around how to retain workers, HR, all those things. And I learned all that stuff in the oil industry. So I'm very excited about that. It also taught me about sharing. We used to give our data to third parties, which then would anonymize it with other people's data so that we could see how everybody was doing. That's not stuff that the clean energy industry does on a regular basis. It used to, but it also taught me things that don't work too, right? So for instance, it taught me that the oil and gas industry doesn't understand project finance. They only know how to do corporate equity and corporate debt. That's what it is, right? They're actually not great at lobbying. For all the stuff that people are like, the oil and gas industry is super powerful. My experience was that they couldn't stand each other in lobbying efforts. It was really hard for them to work together. And so I think people should give themselves a break in terms of how hard it is to bring coalitions together. And I think the clean energy industry has been really good about that. But I learned a lot. And so I'm really glad that I was able to start there. And I think the biggest thing I learned about was risk management and humility. I think that the one thing the oil industry has is a humility around what it really takes to power a modern society and to have those weight sit on your shoulders. I think that the clean energy industry in general has been, reticent to take that full weight on its shoulders. I think it is finally doing that now. But for a long time, I think it said, well, we're only 2% market share. We don't have to do that. And I think that, now it's taking on that responsibility. And so, the humility by which you do that then informs a lot of, the approaches you take to future jobs and, future careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. I think I'm grateful every day for everything I learned about project management, focus on health and safety, risk management, and interdisciplinary work. And there's a lot that the oil and gas industry has to offer clean energy, and no better place to do it than geothermal. So we're very excited about the renewed interest in finding partners. We're at time here. Is there anything, parting shots that you'd love to give, advice to the industry before we head out?
Just that we're open for business. And if you've got projects, I mean, really, this is the time. There's been no better time than now to really, pursue your dream, join the industry, figure out how we decarbonize. We got a lot of work to do to get to the goals by 2035 for the electricity grid and the rest of the economy by 2050.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your champion of geothermal. I am going to take you up on that. I'm on pitching the Earthshot initiative and how we get more traction at the DOE. And we're very excited for the momentum we've seen already, and the industry is excited to partner with you. And again, I want to thank the organizers of Pivot 2021 for convening this conversation and giving us this opportunity to connect, and really looking forward to the many more great sessions this week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me.